Welcome to Time Vault. I'm ELD and we're back with more Double Masters spoilers. Finally got my allocation numbers, so I am accepting pre-orders through the website. If you do want to support the store, you can actually order from ELDsTimeVaultGames.com. Link in the description. I can only ship in the US, however, due to Wizards restrictions. So sorry, I know a lot of you guys are watching from overseas, but not able to ship internationally as of yet. Actually, not allowed to ship internationally if the boxes are sealed. You know what? If you're interested in boxes internationally, message me and I can do a box opening video and then ship you the contents of the box. That would actually be pretty fun. Anyways, right to it. Just doing stuff on the fly here. So, Vengevine. This guy is vintage playable, legacy playable. Very good friends with Survival of the Fittest. Actually, the card that essentially got it banned out of Legacy after being a long-time format staple. It was really considered a pillar of the format, similar to Brainstorm and Force of Will. Survival of the Fittest really defined many metagames, and Vengevine just finally pushed it over the edge, that hasty damage. So often a combo finish. Right now it sees play in Vintage, in a Bazaar of Baghdad deck, and of course in Legacy in a very good Hagak shell. Meddling Mage, I mentioned this in the last video. This is kind of the Avatar, the Last Airbender-esque look. We've got kind of a waterbending feel to it. And the alternate version there from Alara Reborn kind of has a little bit of a firebending feel. So I kind of get what they're going for with this. I think fans of the show will probably be a fan of that card. Treasure Mage. We've already seen some quality cards that this guy can fetch up. There's a cycle of these, Trinket Mage, Treasure Mage, and Trophy Mage for less than, you get a 1 or less casting. Here you get 6 or more, and then Treasure is exactly 3, so you can go get things like, Trophy goes get things like Sword of Fire and Ice. This will grab some powerful cards. It kind of cycles, in a sense, like replaces itself. And is probably totally fine in Limited, as you're going to be grabbing something very spicy to play in later turns, and it can buy some time or set a clock in the meanwhile. Sundering Titan is one of those cards that you might grab, and this guy is very unfriendly. Now keep in mind, you are choosing a land of each basic type and then destroying those lands, so this can get really ugly with dual lands in constructed formats. There was actually a time where this card was played in Vintage in a deck called 7-10 Split. A little bowling pun there for anyone that actually still bowls. Nothing wrong with bowling, just I don't think too many people are doing it now in the middle of the pandemic. And this guy can actually target, say, a volcanic island as a island and a mountain. So you can actually choose the same card twice, meaning that you can potentially manage to preserve your mana base with a Sundering Titan, even if you have dual lands out. Trinisphere is a big printing. Now, this card has a lot of value in recent years. When it was so good that it had to be restricted in Vintage, it never really cracked much of a value. The fact that it only could be played alongside cards like Mishra's Workshop and the Power 9, I guess just never merited it. There were cards in Vintage that did have quite a value, but for whatever reason, Trinisphere was just never one of them. Not that Vintage doesn't ever drive prices, but I don't know. Trinisphere was deemed to be inherently unfun, and that probably still holds true. You can take a look at Trinisphere, take a look at the board state, and recognize that you're only going to be able to play 1 or 2 spells, depending on how much mana you have for the most part, and it really reduces the game down to a very simple, can you deal with this or not situation. Some of my favorite games with Trinisphere involve my opponent tapping their own Trinisphere to effects like Tangle Wire accidentally and getting me back into the game. Those were some good times. Academy Ruins. This card, the full art version here, is very good paired with explosives. Engineered explosives. Couldn't get that first word. Engineered explosives, very, very good with Academy Ruins, allowing you to recur it and handle whatever permanent your opponent puts out, and of course prevent you from getting decked. Academy Ruins is definitely a eternal playable card, and used to be good with Counterbalance as well, being able to put Sensei's Divining Top back on top of your library a ruthless play, as Sensei's Top was so important in those counterbalance decks. Onto this cycle of lands. The filter lands are very in demand. I think right now these are pre-ordering for about half of their Shadowmoor counterparts. We've got Firelit Thicket, Graven Cairns. Remember, this one was also reprinted several times. Future Sight, and also in a Masters set, Wooded Bastion, Sunken Ruin, and Mystic Gate. And, lands, they do well over time. The lands are way more important than beginners ever realize, and the longer people stay in the game, the more they kind of get a level of sophistication where they feel okay about spending $10 or $20 on their mana base as opposed to some big splashy creature, because they know that their deck is going to function that much more smoothly. You'll see that evolution in many developing metagames or player communities where people start to make those moves and eventually start to set their sights on fetch lands and revised dual lands. But these guys can be part of a very competitive commander deck, as they are very, very solid replacements for many of the other lands that you might be playing in a more budget build. So if you have anything coming into play tapped, these are certainly going to be better than those. They're particularly good in 2-color decks. Rolling Earthquake. Now, this has already seen a reprint in From the Vault Annihilation, and we can expect the price on this to further be annihilated. There's definitely a difference in between cards that have a super high value predominantly on the demand side, where there's just super high demand, or if there's just really low supply. And P3K was one of those super low supply situations where a lot of the reprints just tank mercilessly. We've seen like a card like Strategic Planning was at one point the darling of the vintage format. It saw a little bit of play in a top 8 of Worlds, and that card spiked big time. The reprint at Uncommon it was a commander set, so it's not really technically an uncommon. There's one in every box. It has the same rarity as a mythic from those boxes. However, it really cratered the value of that card, never to return. So Rolling Earthquake, if you wanted to play with this effect, it was already fairly cheap. It'll get cheaper. Blasphemous Act, a really good board sweeper for commander, of course, giving you a cost reduction for each other creature in multiplayer games. This thing's usually costing 1 mana, and actually had a recent game of Commander. I rarely play Commander, but we actually had a player who had built Super Friends and was letting someone borrow it. That person had to leave, and I tagged in, and it was some fun. I got to do some stuff with the deck that he hadn't seen done before, and it all began with a Blasphemous Act saving the table from a player that was ready to combo off. That bought me a little bit of table cred. Nobody immediately jumped all over me like they typically would if I sit down at a commander table, as they'd be perceived to be the biggest threat. But that Blasphemous Act kind of got me a little bit of leeway, and it was just enough to ultimately proliferate with I think it was a Tameo to get her Omniscient style ultimate, and it was bloodshed from there. Chord of Calling. This is the new art. We've actually got both of them printed. I'm not familiar if this is new or if it's a promo. Played Chord of Calling in some commander decks here or there that I've borrowed, and the card does some serious work in the right type of deck, pulling together combos and potentially just winning the game on the spot depending on what you have. Definitely sees modern play as well. Thraben Inspector, I believe, and I kind of like these type of printing. So this is a card that wouldn't really be on anybody's radar outside of potentially Pauper. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's the only place I really know it from. And the red-white artifact decks in Pauper love this guy. And I actually have no complaints if they're reprinting commons that are good in Pauper, or downshifting cards. That's always fun too. But accessibility on those cards is pretty nice. It's pretty much entirely labor when we're talking about cards that are 25 cents. I mean, how much does it cost to pay somebody to sort a card, put it in an envelope, ship out the order? I mean, 25 cents is about as low as you're going to go for most of the major vendors. TCG Player does have some people that treat it as a loss leader, where they're just like losing money, hoping that you'll also buy other stuff from them. I don't think that works out for them if I had to guess, because that platform is super cutthroat and has no reason to be loyal to anybody. They're just constantly just throwing the next lowest price in your face as a race to the bottom, as people are essentially just selling out and probably going out of business for the most part. I'd love to know their turnover numbers. The major vendors that I've dealt with for many years, they're pricing stuff out at 25 cents, and something like this, I am totally happy to get in a booster pack. I think this one might even be 50 cents, to be fair. This one might have enough demand because of how good it is in Pauper. So that might actually transcend the just labor portion of it. Valorous Stance, maybe? Yep, this one's not super exciting. Let me know if I got that one right. Beacon of Unrest. The beacons have actually seen a lot of play, even in constructed at times. The red beacon was actually a card that saw play in Doomsday of all things back in the day with Vintage. You would Doomsday for 5 cards. The final card in your library would actually be the red beacon, Beacon of Destruction, and that does 5 damage. So you'd essentially Ancestral and play out the Lotus and Dark Ritual and just end up Beacon of Unresting, and you'd have Mind's Desire as the last card. So it would be Ancestral into Lotus, Dark Ritual, Mind's Desire, and you'd Mind's Desire with a single card left in your library, which was Beacon of Unrest, so you just go 5/5/5/5 to their face. We've improved a lot with the quality of cards, but Beacon of Unrest still sees a lot of play for Commander players, and it feels to them like getting extra value, shuffling it into the library. It's not anywhere near the same effect as drawing a card, but the fact that it's still in their library feels great for many casual players. Pyrite Spellbomb. This one has also seen Vintage play, if you can believe it. This is the combo kill with Auriok Salvagers in a deck called Bomberman, and you can also make that happen with Lion's Eye Diamond. So it's a possible kill in Legacy and Commander. With Black Lotus, much better, as you don't have to discard your hand, but you sacrifice the artifact, giving you 3 mana, use 2 of it to return to your hand, and just rinse and repeat to get as much mana of any color as you want. Along the way, you can return other low casting cost artifacts and just straight up win the game. Pyrite Spellbomb, a card that you can just recycle, just doing 2 damage at a time, however many times are necessary for your victory. And in Vintage, I actually had a lot of success with Salvagers, top 8ing and winning many tournaments in the New England area. And one of the things that would catch people off guard was Sensei's Divining Top with Engineered Explosives, where what you could do is you could tap the Sensei's top to draw, respond by blowing up the Engineered Explosives, destroying the top, which nets in you drawing a card. Since you have infinite mana already from your Black Lotus combo, you can just assemble that again and again and again, draw through your entire deck, and then win by any means necessary. Mishra's Bauble. This card is going to take a hit. This is a big one. Still love the art, love the subtlety of it, love that Apocalypse style Phyrexian mask in the center of the card. Beautiful art by Chippy, and this one's just going to take a big hit. Sorry guys, if you already have your Mishra's Baubles, you're going to be losing some value there. Hopefully the fun of Double Masters offsets that for you, but that is just how it is. Mox Opal. Now this one's going to be interesting. It's really going to be fun to watch how much mythics get influenced by this set. There's 2 cards per pack that are potentially mythics. We don't know if you can actually get 2 mythics. You probably can. It's probably just 2 rare slots. We'll find out pretty soon. But Mox Opal already getting the axe means that there's potentially a lot of these already in circulation, or at least the population of this card in the open market is going to be pretty high, and there's just going to be more piling on. So this could be a good time for Commander players to finally take that step and push their mana base to that next level. A lot of people are running talismans and tons of artifacts, but Mox Opal, amongst the best accelerants that have ever been printed, right at home alongside the unlimited Moxes, and in fact is the backbone of the Vintage Paradoxical Outcome decks, which I've recently been covering on the channel. If you've ever checked out the Fast Effects series, usually it's Legacy. Well, while we're getting these online Discord matches figured out, we've been doing matches from the vault, and we've had a bunch of fun Vintage events, and that card sees a ton of play in those decks. Ensnaring Bridge, yet another reprint of this card. It was, I don't even think it was that expensive. It might have been 30 or 40 bucks. This one's, we'll see, probably going to take a hit. Kodaltha Forge Master, the reprint that nobody asked for. But again, I've sleeved this card up in Vintage. I've won Moxes with this card. You can actually use this to great effect. I've lost actually at the win-in at Waterbury to this card. And yeah, you can basically go get your one-shot robot, your Blightsteel Colossus. This is a very dangerous threat. And you can also assemble Time Vault Key, along with a whole bunch of other nasty lines that this guy enables. Being able to use him to go get any type of combo kill easily offsets the 3 artifacts if you have enough of them in your mana base, and unlimited Moxes make that super easy. Duplicant, another Vintage playable card, 6 casting cost, 2/4. Of course, any type of artifact when you're assessing cards for Vintage needs to be taken in context with the all-powerful Mishra's Workshop. The ability to essentially cast this off of just 2 lands makes this a much cheaper threat. And this guy can do some serious heavy lifting, and at commander tables can do a lot of damage with flicker effects. Sword of Fire and Ice, one of the best equipments of all time. In Limited, this might be the best card in the set for Limited. Like, let's see how this goes, but like, whew, it's tough to top this in a sealed pool. You open this and all of your creatures are MVPs. Anything that carries this into battle is going to be very formidable, getting that +2/+2 and pro red and pro blue. And of course, that doing 2 damage and drawing a card is super powerful. Note that the way this card is actually templated, it says it deals 2 damage to any target and you draw a card, which makes that 1 ability. So if you do happen to target a creature with that ability and they remove it in response, say bounce it with a Wirewood Symbiote or something, that will counter the card draw. So just be careful with that one, guys. I've seen plenty of people who have got thinking that their Sword of Fire and Ice was going to draw them a card when there was an on-board trick to prevent that. Godo, Bandit Warlord, a commander card that is fine. I think he was worth a few bucks. The rares in this set will probably take a pretty strong hit compared to the mythics, so if he was worth a ton, probably going to be moving down. Oh, and this Sword of Fire and Ice, they weren't next to each other in the file. This is some gorgeous art. I mean, they are really doing an amazing job, and I love how many principles are on display in these cards. These are some very sophisticated pieces of fantasy art. Their use of lighting, their composition, their throwbacks to the lore of the game, and just the attention to detail is really on another level. They are doing a fantastic job, and I am very impressed with so much of the art in this set, and I've been getting that impression from a lot of other people as well. This is going to be a fan-pleasing set for many. Of course, the art's not going to be for everyone. Some people are going to have other art that they prefer, and they can use those versions. And as I've said before, I think that's a great thing. I love it when people actually get to choose their favorite version of the card. And, even though Magic's been around for 27 years, most of the cards really don't have that many options. You might have 2 or 3 options at most for most cards. And at one point, Magic was actually printing, like in Alliances, they were just printing 2 different versions art. Like, you want Gorilla Shaman? You want one that's nursing a baby? Or do you want one that's, going to kill you with a spear? That was something that they did for tons of cards, and at the common and uncommon slots, I believe. So they've known all along that people like to customize their decks, and now they're really embracing it with these alternate art and masterpiece versions and showcase versions. Hammer of Nizan, this was a commander card that I've sold a ton of. I don't even know what it does, so I'm going to read it real quick here. It says, when it or another equipment enters the battlefield, you can attach that equipment to target creature you control. The creature gets +2/+0 and indestructible. There's a reason why people have been buying it off of me. It's definitely a quality commander card. And yeah, it's just something that was super high price. People were always thrilled when I had it because it was in one of those rare commander printings. And I swear I've sold a ton of this card this past year. And now it's going to be getting a reprint. So commander players are going to rejoice that they're going to be able to get their hands on this. It was just a difficult card for many people to get. I had tons of people showing up who had tried every card shop they had heard of. They just hadn't heard of me yet, and they've been coming back since, which is always appreciated. Masterwork of Ingenuity. You can have this enter the battlefield as a copy of any equipment on the battlefield. Commander card, a card that pairs well with expensive equipment and can be tutored up with Trinket Mage. This is one of those nice Esper cards. It's colorless, but it feels Esper. Thragtusk, legacy playable card? Kind of. I mean, Nick Fit players would argue that it is. 5 casting cost for a 5/3 with tons of value tacked on. You're gaining 5 life, or you're getting a 3/3 beast, and that's enter and leave the battlefield. So that's not a die trigger. If they do bounce it, you're still left with a 3/3. So this guy does a lot of work and is not super embarrassing to sleeve up in a deck like Nick Fit, where you're able to just honestly hardcast it like on turn 2. That beats more than its fair share of decks. Greater Good, phenomenal commander card. Art's pretty, got some creepy stuff going on there. This card does a lot for combo engines. Sacrifice a creature to draw cards equal to its power, then discard 3 when you're sacrificing fatties or cards that have received temporary bonuses like Invigorate or Giant Growth style effects. This can do a lot of heavy lifting, cycling through a deck, potentially comboing for just a 1-turn kill or just providing incredible value. Many green commander decks are going to be super happy to have this card, as long as they're kind of a mid-range that can actually be drawing more than 3 cards. Even cycling draw 3, discard 3 is not without merit, but of course the larger the creature, the more of a problem it is for your opponents, and it does make their removal just awful. You get down something beefy on the board and they try and remove it, and then the response to that is you're just going to draw a whole lot more support from your deck. Kemba, Ka Regent. People actually considered whether or not to play this in Death and Taxes, which is saying very little. Pretty much any 3 casting costs legendary creature, people are always asking if it's going to be good enough when it's printed, and the answer was no. No, this is not good enough for Legacy Death and Taxes. However, it is a cat, and there's going to be a lot of fun cat commander decks that will certainly be using Kemba to create even more cats based off of all the equipment. I mean, cats like shiny things. Everyone gets that. Geist of Saint Traft, a card that saw a bunch of play in Standard and a little bit of play in some other formats. The hexproof has made it somewhat difficult to deal with in super creature light metagames, and it does have a pretty aggressive stat line when you factor in the 4/4 Angel, essentially a recurring ball lightning. But ultimately, most formats at this point have been inundated with creatures, making it difficult to break through with this 2/2. He is a spirit, however, and spirit tribal commander has certainly gotten a big boost lately, so those players will be happy to play with him. Mere Battlesphere, the one-time tinker target. This was actually a card that people would tinker out in Vintage back in the day, and this is a lot of damage. Now, it's not Blightsteel Colossus damage where it's infect, but it is quite a lot. You're able to get those Mere, and when combined with Goblin Welder, this was actually a very compelling choice. There was a point in Magic where it was a real question about what the best tinker target was. Blightsteel, for the most part, put an end to that discussion, but we've seen Mere Battlesphere, Pentavis, we had Sphinx of the Steelwind for a while. That one was actually a nightmare for Tarmogoyf players. But now the one-shot robot pretty much rules that tinker slot, though this one could be very good in your sealed deck, especially if you can get it in early off of, say, a Trash for Treasure. I mean, that's going to be pretty much unbeatable on turn 2 or 3. I guess turn 3 or 4 if it's limited. Master Transmuter. This card has been brewed in Constructed, is a big-time player in Commander, paying a blue to return an artifact you control to its owner's hand, and then you put an artifact from your hand onto the battlefield. Really like a tinker that only works with your hand as a resource, but it is incredibly powerful and gets all sorts of enter the battlefield and leaves the battlefield triggers. This one certainly going to be welcome in your Esper Commander deck. Phyrexian Metamorph, I have a little bit of a soft spot for this card and Sculpting Steel. I don't know if it was Sculpting Steel or Metamorph. I think it was Metamorph back in the day, where I was able to get down like 3 Batter Skulls on turn 2 in Vintage. Like turn 1, Batter Skull, turn 2, copy it twice, and just easily carried that game. They were trying to play with creatures, and that didn't work out. I also love copying Batter Skull with this card because you can pay the 3 to return it to your hand and then get another awesome card to copy, an artifact or creature later on. People always miss that line. Here's some new art on the Phyrexian Metamorph, and boy, I'm not sure what it's actually... It looks like it's copying a Blightsteel. Yeah, that kind of looks like it's copying a Blightsteel, so not bad. It's a pretty good thing to copy, not going to lie. Reshape. It's no Tinker. So Tinker just got the reprint in the Mystery Boosters. Here is a Tinker Light card. This has seen play in the Lotus Bloom decks, I believe. In Modern? Yeah, it's got to be Modern. That's all I'll say about it. This has seen some constructed play. I would expect the value on this one to go down significantly. Master of Ethereum. There's a huge population of this card. Right now, I don't think Affinity is actually good in Modern. I haven't checked. There's been times where I've just randomly sleeved up Affinity and walked through Modern tournaments, even when it's not supposed to be any good. And I had run Master of Ethereum in some of those builds at time, particularly because it's just bigger than Tarmogoyf most of the time. There's a lot of cards that make that difficult to do in Modern. I won't get into Kolgan's Command and Bloodbraid Elf and all the horrifying things that happen to Affinity players in Modern. Walking Ballista, multi-format all-star, finisher of combos, killer of tiny creatures. This guy does a lot of work and is just all around a very good Magic card. The fact that you can get this out before Counter Magic is online and then dump infinite mana into it later always makes this super dangerous. Really, the only remote drawback that I can say about this card is you can't really weld it in with any type of efficiency. You really have to jump through hoops in order to make that happen. So the fact that you can't recur it from the graveyard, really the only strike against it. Other than that, it is a vastly superior Triskelion, being able to come down as early as the first turn with a little bit of acceleration and can get far, far bigger. This pairs incredibly well with Arcbound Ravager. I've seen that as a kind of shotgun win where you sacrifice a ton of artifacts to Ravager, get the counters on Ballista, and then finish the job removing those counters. Basilisk Collar, timely printing with all the cats and dogs running around from the core set 21. And yeah, I mean, it's probably a good boy. It's a little over the top. But yeah, that's all I'll say. Death Touch and Lifelink is borderline, I won't say unbeatable, but man, it is a huge pain to deal with. I'd still take Sword of Fire and Ice over this, but just barely. Death Touch and Lifelink, especially with the low casting cost and the ability to pass this thing around, you can essentially make it very bad idea to block your guy and then make it very bad idea to attack into you by passing this back and forth. Grand Architect. This guy sees a lot of play in all sorts of, Johnny combo style commander decks, tapping an untapped blue creature you control to get 2 that can, of course, only be used for artifacts or artifact abilities, is exactly what the deck wants to do and can create just crazy amounts of mana and do all sorts of busted stuff. This guy is fine. I mean, it's not necessarily something you're going to be super thrilled with in Limited. Being a 3-mana 1-power creature is not ideal, but it does buff the rest of your team, which is welcome. And you can also make your artifact creatures blue to get the extra buff as well. And here it is, Force of Will, the new art for this. It's going to take me a little while to warm up to this, I think. I really love the original Force of Will. It's a card that first made me recognize how not only are Magic cards a place for fantasy art, but they are within themselves a work of art. So Force of Will, the composition of that card, the red background, and it's actually accidental. The card was intentionally originally going to be red, and it ended up getting shifted into blue later. So it's just this beautiful coincidence, just happy accident where this card became so iconic because of the composition. And this one, I mean, I'll have to see the printing in person. This doesn't feel like it's going to be as recognizable from across the room. We do still have Therese Nielsen's redo of Force of Will, which I love the fact that they went back to her for the reimagining of the card. And I think she did a absolutely stunning job. One of the more talented Magic artists that we've ever seen with the game from the beginning. I think it's a shame they won't be working with her anymore. And hopefully people can understand each other a little bit more in the future. We'll see. I know Therese through some correspondences, and she has nothing but love in her heart. She may not phrase that the way that everybody wants her to, but I do think it's a shame that people are not able to communicate. Didn't actually want to get political there. This is the end of the video, and I have no way of editing that out. But that's it. All right. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. This was a really long one, and I am now accepting pre-orders on Double Masters. I found out my allocation, and you can actually go to ELD's TimeVaultGames.com to pre-order yours. And like I said, if you're an international patron or international viewer and you want me to do a box opening and then send you the box, that sounds like a lot of fun too. So let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.